right, buckle up for a deep dive into a case that's disturbing and fascinating all at the same time. We're diving into the case of Stephen McDaniel, a law student, seemingly ordinary guy, but with some really dark secrets.
Yeah, this case, it really got to me because it shows how technology is changing investigations. McDaniel's digital footprint, like his internet searches, became so important to figuring out what happened. It's like what he did online gave us a glimpse into his mind, maybe even revealing things that would have stayed hidden otherwise.
We're mainly using this YouTube video from JCS Criminal Psychology today. It lays everything out really well, the details, the psychology, all of it. So picture this. Stephen McDaniel and Lauren Giddings are neighbors, both law students living in the same apartment complex. On the surface, typical student life, but underneath, something sinister was brewing.
And that's where forensic psychology really comes in. When experts look at stalking cases, they focus on a few key things. The relationship between the stalker and the victim, what motivates the stalker, their whole psychological and social background, and then the victim's vulnerabilities. In the past, putting all of this together took a lot of time and effort, but the internet has given investigators a powerful new tool, and it's the search history.
Yeah, it is kind of mind-blowing how much our online activity can reveal, right? Like a digital trail of everything, our thoughts, our desires, even our darkest urges.
Absolutely. And in McDaniel's case, his internet searches painted a pretty disturbing picture. A lot of his activity was centered around violent pornography, often stuff with themes of torture.
And it gets even worse. He was also searching for information on how to commit sexual assault, even typing in things like how to molest a sleeping girl. To me, that's a huge red flag. That suggests he was thinking about this, planning it even.
You're right. Most people would be repulsed by that kind of content. But for McDaniel, it seemed to be a recurring theme. And that brings up the question of desensitization. Could his constant exposure to extreme material online have pushed him to need more and more intense stimuli? Like, did it blur the lines between fantasy and reality for him?
Okay, so let's unpack that a bit more. What would the psychological implications of that kind of desensitization be, especially in this case?
Well, imagine constantly seeing violent imagery. The shock value fades over time, and what was once horrifying might start to seem almost normal. This is dangerous, especially when someone already has psychological vulnerabilities. In McDaniel's case, his internet activity might have been like a rehearsal, a way to mentally prepare for what he was thinking about doing.
That's a terrifying thought.
Yeah.
So how does Lauren Giddings fit into all of this? Was she specifically targeted?
The video suggests that Lauren, being a popular young woman with lots of friends, wasn't a typical target in terms of being, socially vulnerable, but she may have been vulnerable in a different way. The video mentions perceptual naivety.
Perceptual naivety. What does that mean?
Basically, it means she hadn't experienced stalking before, and that might have made it hard for her to recognize the danger she was in. Stalking often relies on secrecy and manipulation. Victims who haven't been through it before, they might dismiss warning signs or explain away the stalker's actions, seeing them as harmless or just misunderstanding what they mean.
That's chilling, especially since the video mentions that Lauren had actually felt uneasy around Stephen. She told her friends he made her uncomfortable, and she even felt like someone had been in her apartment.
Yeah, those feelings of unease, that gut instinct, they were warning signs. But without any solid proof or experience with this type of behavior, it's hard to act on those feelings. Sadly, Lauren's intuition was right. Stephen had stolen a master key and had been going into her apartment when she wasn't home, even filming her.
Okay, so we're seeing this escalation of behavior here. First, the disturbing internet searches, then sneaking into Lauren's apartment and filming her. This is classic stalker behavior, right? Building up to something much worse.
Absolutely. It's a pattern in many stalking cases. It starts with things that seem harmless, but gets more intense, more intrusive, and threatening over time. And in the early morning hours of June 26, 2011, Stephen McDaniel did something unthinkable. He snuck into Lauren's apartment while she was asleep.
And what happened next is just horrifying. Can you walk us through the events of that night?
Of course. Lauren woke up and, anyone would panic seeing Stephen in her apartment. There was a struggle and Stephen strangled her for about 15 minutes. The brutality of it is just awful. What happened after is even more horrifying. Stephen dismembered Lauren's body in her bathtub using a hacksaw. Then he put the body parts in trash bags and threw them in different dumpsters around campus.
It's hard to even wrap your head around that level of depravity.
I agree. It's a truly terrible crime.
And to make things even creepier, 3 days later, Lauren's friends went to her apartment, worried because they hadn't heard from her. And guess who showed up? Acting all friendly and offering to help. Stephen McDaniel.
Yeah, that detail always gets me. It suggests he was being so deceptive, which is really disturbing.
It's like he was playing a part, trying to look innocent even though he knew what he had done.
Exactly. And later that day, a search party found some of Lauren's remains in a dumpster near the apartments. The rest of her remains were never found.
So the police are just starting their investigation, interviewing neighbors and classmates, including Stephen McDaniel.
Yeah,
It's interesting that McDaniel actually gave an interview to the local news before he knew they had found any of Lauren's remains.
that's right. And he acts really strangely during the interview. He seems nervous, fidgety, and when the reporter says they found a body, his reaction is so weird. He says, "I think I need to sit down," but it just doesn't sound genuine. It's like he's putting on a show.
Almost like he's trying to fake being shocked and concerned, but it comes across as forced and insincere.
Right. That's one of the things that made investigators suspicious.
Later that morning, McDaniel was interviewed by the police. What happened during that first police interview?
He offered to help with the investigation, but seemed apprehensive and kept acting strangely. Two things from that interview really stand out. First, he said he was a virgin, saving himself for marriage. And second, when the detective saw scratches on his face and stomach, McDaniel said he did it to himself in his sleep.
Wait a minute. He claims to be a virgin but had scratches all over. Those two things don't really add up.
I know, and that's when the police started to see him as a serious suspect. They got a warrant to search his apartment, and what they found was pretty alarming.
What did they find?
They found a bunch of swords, guns, and supplies, like he was prepping for some kind of doomsday situation. They also found a mask made from women's underwear, which is, to put it mildly, creepy. And, maybe the most incriminating thing, they found condoms.
Hold on, didn't he just tell them he was a virgin?
Yep. When they asked him about the condoms, McDaniel said he stole them from another apartment. This was a turning point in the investigation. That lie, on top of everything else they found in his apartment, gave the police enough to arrest him.
And that's how one of the weirdest and most captivating interrogations I've ever seen begins.
It really is. Watching the footage of that interrogation is like watching a game of psychological chess.
Okay, so let's walk through this interrogation. It starts just before 11 p.m., right? What's McDaniel like from the beginning?
Right away, his behavior is just off. He talks in a monotone, barely looks at them, and he just seems so eerie. He's described as looking lifeless and robotic in his answers. That's super unusual in interrogations.
And how did the detectives react to that? It must have been frustrating trying to figure him out.
Totally. The detectives seem thrown off by how he's acting. They try all sorts of things to get some kind of emotional response, some crack in his facade that might lead to a confession.
So what kind of things are they trying?
At first, they're pretty aggressive. They challenge him, use bad language, even try to shame him for seemingly not caring.
Wow, that's intense. Do we have any examples of that from the footage?
Yeah, let's listen to a clip where the lead detective really goes after McDaniel, questioning whether he's being honest and accusing him of putting on an act for the cameras.
That's pretty wild to hear how aggressive the detective is being. But it's even more striking how McDaniel doesn't even flinch. He barely reacts. It's almost like he's not even there.
Yeah, it's remarkable. It's hard to tell exactly what's going on in his head. Is he purposely trying to avoid saying anything that could get him in trouble?
Yeah.
Is it like a psychological reaction to all the pressure? Or is it something else entirely? The video even points out that this is super rare in interrogations. Most people would at least try to defend themselves. But McDaniel seems to have completely shut down.
It's like he's built a wall around himself, some kind of mental barrier that nothing can get through. And the detectives, no matter what they try, can't seem to break it down.
Exactly. They even use something called the futility technique. They try to make him think there's no point in resisting because they already have a ton of evidence against him. They even lie, telling him they found his hair and blood at the crime scene.
But we know that's not true, right? They couldn't have found his hair and blood in Lauren's apartment because he went in there with her friends after she was already dead.
That's right. The detectives were bluffing, trying to get him to confess. But even that doesn't work. McDaniel keeps his cool.
So we've seen the aggressive approach. What else do they try?
When the tough guy act doesn't work, the other detective steps in and tries something different. He tries to be more understanding and sympathetic.
What do you mean by sympathetic? How does that work in an interrogation?
He tries to connect with McDaniel on a personal level. He suggests maybe he was bullied or treated badly by women, or that something just snapped inside him and led to this horrible act. He's basically trying to give McDaniel a socially acceptable explanation, a way to save face.
Almost like he's giving McDaniel a way out, a story that might make him feel better about confessing. Do we have any example of this from the interrogation?
Yeah, let's hear a clip where the detective uses this more compassionate tone.
Detective, I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell it. I wanted to be here with you to go through that process. Because I know you're not a monster, man. I know you're not a bad guy. You're just a hardworking student trying to pass a bar exam at you. You ain't got a lot of support from your family, do you? McDaniel, yes, I do. Detective, a lot of people can't say that. And the fact that you do have support from your family should make things easier. Your family wants to feel like they've raised somebody that tells the truth and is honest, right? McDaniel, yes. Detective, did you hurt that girl, Stephen? McDaniel, no. Detective, have you ever hurt anyone? McDaniel, no. Detective, you never hurt anyone. McDaniel, no.
It's so different from how aggressive the other detective was. Now he almost sounds like he's begging McDaniel, trying to appeal to his sense of decency and his family. But what's crazy is that even this emotional approach doesn't seem to faze McDaniel.
Exactly. He doesn't react. His demeanor stays the same. It's like he's emotionally numb, totally disconnected from how serious the accusations are and the detective's pleas.
So they've tried good cop, bad cop. What happens next? Do they get a confession out of him?
Not really. After almost 90 minutes of intense questioning, the lead detective does something unexpected. He completely changes gears and starts asking McDaniel these totally ordinary, non-confrontational questions.
Really? That's weird. After all that intense questioning, what's the point of that?
It's hard to say for sure, but maybe he's trying to catch McDaniel off guard. Maybe he thinks that if he makes McDaniel feel comfortable and safe, he might let something slip.
Like he's trying to disarm him psychologically, make him feel relaxed and more open to talking. Is there an example of this from the footage?
Yeah, here's a clip where the detective is talking about McDaniel's personality, almost complimented how well he communicates. It's a huge difference from the accusations we heard before.
Detective. You know, it's crazy. I was talking to people that he works with and everything. They talk about how he's always expresses himself. He don't know. He's very talkative, Stephen. They say, you're so talkative, buddy, that you're always so friendly. You stop in and say hello and you talk. Why is it that you're acting so short with us tonight? If you have all this cabinet personality about you, why is it that everything that we get from you is yes, no, I don't know, I don't know? Why are you acting like this, Stephen? You see how I'm able to talk in complete sentences like we're having a conversation, but the only thing you're bringing to the table is a yes, no, or I don't know.
It's amazing how the detective changes his tone throughout this interrogation. It's almost like he's trying on different personalities, hoping to find one that will get a real response from McDaniel.
You got it. It's a fascinating example of psychological manipulation. But even with all that, McDaniel doesn't change how he acts. He keeps giving these short, vague answers. And the interrogation ends without a confession.
So, no confession. But remember, the police already found a lot of incriminating evidence in McDaniel's apartment.
That's true. The swords, the stockpile of supplies, the mask made from women's underwear, and obviously the condoms, which contradict him saying he was a virgin, it all looks really bad for him.
And then there's the interrogation footage itself. He never confesses, but how he acts is so weird. It's like watching a psychological thriller play out in real life.
I agree. His flat affect, his monotone voice, the way he avoids making eye contact, it's all so unsettling. And this is where the case takes another turn. A little while after the interrogation, McDaniel's mother shows up at the police station.
And how does McDaniel react to seeing his mom? Does he change how he's acting?
He does. In fact, he completely changes. He snaps out of this strange, trance-like state and starts acting like his normal self again. He even shows emotion, breaks down, and cries in front of his mother.
That's wild. It's like someone flipped a switch. His weird behavior just vanishes when his mom shows up. What are some possible explanations for that?
It's hard to say for sure, and the video doesn't give any definite answers. Was he acting strange during the interrogation on purpose to avoid getting himself in more trouble? Was it all improvised, something he came up with on the spot to confuse the detectives? Or did he genuinely have a psychological breakdown because of all the stress?
Those are some interesting possibilities. It makes you wonder what was going on in his mind the whole time.
For sure. We may never know for sure why he acted that way, but the fact that he could turn it on and off so quickly makes you think about his mental state and how much control he had.
And even though McDaniel's behavior during the interrogation is still a mystery, there was way too much evidence against him.
Absolutely. As we talked about, the physical evidence they found in his apartment was already bad, but the investigation didn't stop there.
Right. They kept looking for evidence. What else did they find?
Well, they found hundreds of pictures of Lauren on McDaniel's flash drive, along with videos he took inside her apartment without her knowing. This proved they were right to think he had been stalking her.
So not only the internet searches and the stuff from his apartment, but now they have pictures and videos of Lauren that he took secretly. It's really stacking up against him now.
You got it. And it gets worse. They found a hacksaw in a supply closet at the apartment complex. This hacksaw had red stains on it, and DNA testing proved it was Lauren's blood.
That is horrifying. That directly connects him to the dismemberment of her body.
And to make the connection even stronger, they also found the packaging for that same type of hacksaw in McDaniel's apartment.
It's like something out of a crime show. With all this evidence against him, McDaniel's lawyers knew they had a tough case to fight. What happened next? Did it go to trial?
With all that evidence and the possibility of getting the death penalty, McDaniel's lawyers told him to take a plea deal.
So he never actually went to trial.
No. He pleaded guilty to murder to avoid the death penalty and got a life sentence without parole. He's serving that sentence now in a high-security prison in Georgia.
It's such a sad ending to a really disturbing case. Let's take a moment to think about that before we move on to our final thoughts.
Wow, this deep dive into Stephen McDaniel's case has been quite a journey. It really makes you think about the dark side of people and how technology can both show us the truth and hide it at the same time.
Yeah, it's definitely a complicated and disturbing story. And like we talked about, what McDaniel did online was so important for understanding how things escalated and how obsessed he was with Lauren. It's a scary example of how someone's internet activity can give us a glimpse into their darkest thoughts and intentions.
You know, one of the things that really gets to me is how his behavior got worse and worse over time. It started with those creepy internet searches, and that he was secretly going into Lauren's apartment, filming her, and finally it led to that horrible act of violence.
That's a classic pattern in stalking cases. It often starts small, with things that don't seem that bad, but it slowly becomes more intense and intrusive. It's a really sneaky and manipulative way to control someone, and it can have devastating effects on the victim.
And tragically, in Lauren's case, the consequences were fatal. It makes you wonder if there were any missed chances to step in, any warning signs that could have been noticed earlier.
It's hard to say for sure. Looking back, it's always easier to see things clearly. But Lauren felt like something was wrong. She had that feeling, and those were warning signs. We have to trust our gut feelings and speak up when we feel threatened or unsafe, even if we don't have proof.
You're absolutely right. It's always better to be safe than sorry. Speaking up might save someone's life. If anyone listening feels threatened or worried about their safety, there are resources available. The National Stalking Hotline is a great place to start. They can give you information, support, and guidance.
Definitely. And it's important to remember that stalking is not about love or affection. It's a way to control and harass someone, and it can seriously hurt the victim psychologically and emotionally.
So, as we wrap up this case, what are some of the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, we saw how technology can be a good and bad thing. It can be a really useful tool for investigators to find evidence and understand why someone committed a crime. But it can also be a way for people to explore and act out disturbing fantasies, which can blur the lines between what's real and what's not.
And the case really shows how important it is to understand stalking behavior, to recognize the warning signs, and to trust our instincts. It reminds us that even people who seem normal can have dark secrets, and that being aware and protecting ourselves are so important these days.
I think those are really important points. It's also a reminder that people are complicated. We saw McDaniel's strange behavior during the interrogation, how he suddenly changed when his mom came in, and we still don't know exactly what his motives were. It all shows us that there's still so much we don't know about the human mind and what makes some people do such terrible things.
It's definitely a case that stays with you, a story that you keep thinking about long after you hear the details. Even though McDaniel is in prison, it leaves you feeling uneasy, knowing that the world can be a dark and unpredictable place.
I agree. It's a sobering thought. But I think it's also important to remember that for every bad thing that happens, there are so many acts of kindness and bravery. We can't let fear and negativity take over and make us forget about the good in people.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive into the strange case of Stephen McDaniel. We hope you found it informative, interesting, and maybe even a little unsettling. It's a case that reminds us to be careful, to trust our gut, and to never forget how complex people can be.
Well said. This has been a really interesting conversation. Until next time, keep learning, keep thinking, and stay safe.